Hi everyone. In the previous video, we covered the basic of Python, we saw data types, and we also covered the variables. Now, in this video, we are going to see what is typecasting and how to take input from the user in Python. Without doing further delay, let's get into this. As you guys can see that I am in PyCharm, so I'm going to create a new file. I will name it L3 because this is our lecture 3. And I'm going to make it size bigger little so it can easily visible to you. Now here I will write lecture 3 and I will comment that. Now guys, first of all we are going to see typecasting. Typecasting is basically we are going to convert a data type to other data type. Let's say we have an integer data type and we are going to convert that data type into float data type. Now I hope you have seen my previous video what is the integer data type, what is float data type, what are string data types, so you can easily follow this video. So now guys, integer to float, if you want to convert float to integer, if you want to convert a string to float, if you want to convert any data type from one data type to another, then you need to use a typecasting. Is that clear? I hope you got it. What is typecasting is. Now typecasting is basically two types. The first type is implicit and the second type is explicit. Now guys, now let's see first of all what is the implicit typecasting. In the implicit typecasting, we don't need to tell the interpreter Python that change my data type from integer to float. It itself is an intelligent that he come to know that yeah, user want to convert that data type to this data type. Let's say, let me write one statement for you for implicit. Let first comment this two line and I will keep it as a center. Now guys, we are going to cover a implicit, so let me write here. Let's say you have a value x which is 5.6. Now you guys know that this is a float data type. X is storing a float data type which is 5.6, right? Now I want to convert that data type into an integer. Then it will call as explicit data type. I will identify that yeah, I want to convert this data type into integer. But what if I am running this program and this value has been converted into int by the computers or by the interpreter, then this will call as implicit data types. So basically what all I want to tell you, implicit means we don't have to do anything. The interpreter will automatically change the data type. But explicit means we have to write some code for changing the data type. I hope this much clear now. So let's see some example of implicit so you have an idea that yeah, how it work. So I'm going to write some statements. Let's say I want to add two number. One is x which is 4 and one is 5.4, right? So I want to add x plus y. I want to add these two numbers. So for add we use a plus operator. We will gonna cover in the next video that what are the operators. But for now I want to add these two values. So let me call it at x plus y. So x plus y, what it will do, it will add these two operator. But guys, remember here this is an int data type and here this is a float. Now what the value will store in x? Now guess, if we add integer and float, then our interpreter will automatically store the float data type because he don't want to lose this 0.4 this 0.4 value in a system. He don't want to lose that. If it will store in, then it will have to print 9. 5 plus 4 is 9. But what it will do, it will see yeah, we have some data after decimal also, so why don't we should give us a float data type to s, so that this value also come into our system into s variable. So let if I print s, Let's see what the value we will get. You guys can see that 9.4 I get because I added 4 plus 5.4, which is 9.4. It assumed 4 as float data type and it converted our s also into a float. Let me print to type of what is the type now I got in s. I already told you in last class, type is used for checking the data type of a variable. So by this we will see what is the data type of our s variable. Let's run this code. You guys can see that our type of s variable is float, but we have used two different data type, int and float, to here, but it took float value because it don't want to lose some data from it, so it preferred to choose a float data type. So here we didn't specify that our s should be float data type. We didn't tell him that yeah, you have to ignore int, you have to take both the value as a float. So it automatically take that is called an implicit typecasting. I hope you got an idea what is implicit. Now let's move to explicit typecasting. I will comment this one. Now I'm going to tell you explicit typecasting. Explicit typecasting. Now guys, I told you here that for implicit we don't need to tell anything to our interpreter, but for explicit we need to tell them that yeah, I want that data type in float, not in integer, not in a string. So how we can do that? Let's see. Let's say our value is 4, but I want that my value should be in a float data type, because 4 is an integer. You guys know that 4 it doesn't have any decimal, so it will consider as a integer. It does not have any point in between. So what I want that my 4 this value should be goes in other variable in a float data type. Let's say I want that my y value should be 4, but not in integer, it should be in float data type. So how would you do that? For that there are some function you have to use. For doing a implicit typecasting, you have to just write float inside in the head of it. You have to use a float function, and inside of that function you have to just write that variable name, and whatever the data type of this variable, that data type will change into float, but it will only change when your data will be compatible to do. I will give that example after some time, so don't worry about that. But yeah, I keep in mind that if your data is not compatible to convert in other data type, but you want to do that, that will not be possible. You will get an error that time. So it's basically you have to use little common sense that whether, let's say you want to convert your name into integer. Your name contain an alphabet. You can't convert that alphabet into integers, right? So now let's move ahead. Now let's see some example of explicit typecasting. So first of all, we will see how to convert into to float and string. Then we will see how to convert float to int and string. Then we will see how to convert string to float and int. Guys, at last we will see some exceptions that where we can get error. Alright, so this much we will going to see in explicit. So yeah, that will be becoming so interesting, because as soon as you will be going in deep, you will be getting some ideas that how it's working actually. So now let's see first of all how to convert into float. So for converting integer to float, I'm taking a variable x and I will give it 4 value, which is integer. Now I want to convert this into float as well as string. So for converting a float, what I will do, I will just write in y is equal to float of x. What it will do, it will convert my integer into float data type, or it may be any data type. So we can't say integer into, because here we know that this is integer, so I told you it is an integer, but it may be any data type. Whatever the data type will come inside this function, it will convert that data type into float, right? So let me print the type of b, type of y. So now we have done one thing, we have converted into float. We will see after when we learn that whether it converted or not, but let's do one more. We have to convert integer to string also. So for converting a string, I will say that z is equal to str function. Inside that I will give my variable name, which is x. so which is integer. So now I will print the type of z also. Now let's run this code and see whether they are actually converted or not. So you can see that our first type has been converted into float, means y have now float value. And the second thing, z also contain a string. Now z will not have an integer data type, it has an string data types. So type has been changed. I hope you are getting the idea that how it's changing and how we are converting a data type to other data types. Now we have seen first point. Now let's move to a second point. Let me comment this one. Now we are going to see how to convert float to int and string. So let's take one float value, x is equal to 4.5, which is float. You guys know that. Now we have to convert this float into an integer and a string. So I will not waste much time here. I will simply write here, for converting an int we have an int function, and inside of that we have to give a variable which is float. I gave x is a float variable, so I gave it that. And now whatever that variable goes inside of this integer functions, it will return an integer data type. So let's print the type of v. And now I'm going to convert that in float into a string also. So I will make a new variable z, and I will say that for converting a string, I have already told you here that we have to use str function. So let's write same function str. Inside of that, let's give our x value. Let's print that type of z. And here I have to give y not b, my bad. So let's run this code. You can see now that we have converted into integer as well as string. Our y value has an integer data type and z has a string data type. So I hope you got the second point too. Now let's move to a third point, which is convert a string to float and int. And let's comment this line. So now we are interested to convert integer string data type into float and integer. So now let's see. Let's make a string 345, right? So now I want to convert this string into integer as well as float. So let's convert first of all float. So I will say that y is equal to float function. You might have now learned that how to convert float and how to convert int. You have to use same function float. Inside of that you have to give the name of variable, which is x, and let's print the type of this y. And now convert that into integer also. Let's make a new variable z, and let's call this function. Inside of that function I will write x, and let's print the type of z also. And quickly run this code. Now you guys can see that I have successfully converted that in string data type. X is a string, so we have converted string data type to integer. So that's was the 3 points which is main in explicit typecasting, and I hope you learned it. And if you still have any doubt, you can ask in the comment section. So now let's move to a fourth point, which is some exceptions in that. So what I basically mean by exceptions, let's see here. Let me copy this one. Now guys, some exception, like let's say I have a variable which is saying that CodeRapt. Now guys, remember here, this type is a string data type, and basically we have learned that we can convert any type by using a float. Let's say I want to convert integers, so I will say new variable y, and I will say int, and inside of that I will give my name variable x. Now guys, you have to tell me, this is a string data type, right? So we want to convert that integer, we have to use int function, and we have to use a variable name. That much I have told you. But guys, can a string can we convert into integers? You will say yes, we can convert. So first of all, let me show you what the error we will get. I just want to print a y, so let me run this code. You can see that I got an error which is value error, and it's saying that invalid literal for int. Let me make it little. Invalid literal for int with base 10. Okay, see. inside of this string we were having 345. That was a lit numbers, so it could successfully converted into a integer as well as floater types because we were having numbers. This were numerical, but it was covering with this double quote. That means it was in string, but data was our numerical. But here we can see that data is in alphabet. It is not containing any numerical. For converting into integer or float from a string data type, you must have to use all the value in decimal or in a numerical. If I just change here any numbers, I would able to successfully run this code. Let's run this one. You can see that I could able to converted this data type, string data type, into integer, but the condition was I have to use only number inside of this string. I can't use any alphabet. If I use here, let's say any alphabet, so again I will get a same error, value error. You can see that. So I hope you got an idea what is an implicit typecasting and what is explicit typecasting. First of all, let's comment this one. So now let's move to a new topic, which is how to take input from the user. So guys, let's take an input from the user. So for that, first of all, remember we need only one function for taking any type of inputs, whether it is integer, whether it is float, whether it is string. We don't need to use a different function. We need to use a single function. The name of function is input. That function is basically used for taking input from the user. And how to do that, let's see. So let's make first of all one statements input from user. So guys, first of all, we are interested to take input from the user as a string. So let's write here input as string. So now guys, let me name a variable name, and I will use that function input. Now focus here, I will use a function and I call that function. Now this function, the work of this function is to take input from the user. The only work of this function is to take input from the user, and whatever the value will be entered by the user through this function, that value will store in this variable print name. Now I will going to write a print name to print the value whatever user will enter. So let's see, let me run this code. So now you guys can see that it asking from input. So I will write here 45. So what I will get, I will get the same output, right? If I again run here and if I write here CodeRapt, so it has printed me my output also. I want here that it should say me enter your name. So how would you do that? Inside of input you have some prompt. You can use that. Let's say I am using here enter your name. Remember, you have to use an input function only, and inside of that with a dual quote or single quote you have to use enter your name, whatever you want, not necessarily this, you can anything. So let's highlight this thing and let me run again. So you can see that it show me that enter your name, and if I write here something CodeRapt, so what it will do, it will print my data. It will not take everything into variable, it will take whatever the value entered by the user. So I will entering only CodeRapt. So let's, as I will enter CodeRapt, I will get my output CodeRapt. Now you can see that, right? So now you come to know that how to take input as a string. But remember guys, we have a lot more data types like integer, float, so we have to see them also. But you guys are now familiar with how to take input from the user as an string. Now let's move to input as an integer. So now I'm going to tell you that let's take a number variable num, and I want an input as a number. No, I don't want that it should print CodeRapt or any name ABC. I want that user should enter some value. So for that I have to call one function, same function input, but here I have to change something. I have to use a typecasting here. That's why I taught you typecasting before telling you this topic. I have to use typecasting. Now let's say user enter here number 42, but that number would always be present in a string. So this is the important point. Let me keep it as a top. Input function always return a string. It will always return you a string. So that's why we don't need to do something here. We never use any typecasting for taking a string because it already returning us a string by default. But now we want our input as an integer. I want that my type of number should be integer. So what I'll say that, first of all, let me add some prompt that enter a number. So now let's see if I print my number. So you can see that, let me comment this one. It will give you output, definitely it will give you output, but let's say I enter here 2456, so it will show you 456, right? But that number is not an integer. If you want to add this number with the others, or let me give you a type, let me print this type of this number. You will see the type should be, let me first of all enter some number. So let me enter 67. Now you can see the type is str, means this is string. We can't use this for adding purpose, for multiplications, for arithmetic operations. So we want that number should come in integer. So how to take an integer number? For that we have to use a typecasting, and I have already told you, for converting string to integer you have to use a function which is int. Here you can see that we were having an x string, yes, here, and for converting this string to integer I use an int function. The same we have to use, whatever the value this will come, we have to use it with the int. Now you can say that value is equal to int of num, and let me print a value, right? So if I do this, then you will see a typecasting also. Let me comment this one, uncomment this one. Now let's run this one. If I enter here 100 or anything else, so you can see that, okay, I am printing a type of number variable. We have to print a type of value now. So now again let's run this one. So if I enter here some value 435, so now you can see that now our value, which was a string, it has converted into integers, and we are getting a number 435 as an integer. Now our value will contain an integer, not a string. So you guys know that for converting a string into integer we need to use a typecasting, and that typecasting we have to use a int function. Now why we need to write this much line of code when we can usually use an int function in front of it, in front of input? If you use int, then basically it will work the same, because what we are doing an extra work, we are writing integer function, and inside of that we are giving num variable, but num variable is also coming from this function. So why don't we directly give that whatever value will be entered by the user, first of all that value should be converted integer, and then that after converting the value in integer, that value should be goes in num variable. So let's comment now this one. We don't need that. We have used int function of before the input. So now it will automatically convert our num as an integer. So now let's print the type of num. Now let's print the type of num and print the type of value of num. So now let's run this one. Let's say I enter the value 98 and I'm getting the same output, right? So now you got an idea that for taking input from the user as an integer, you have to use a int function before input. For taking a string, you don't need to specify any function, because by default input return a string. So now let me comment this one. Now the third point is how to take input as a float. Now I think I don't need to tell you, because you might be familiar with the typecasting and you know which function you have to use before int, but still let's see. As float, I want a number which should be in float. So first of all let me write input statement, and let me write inside of that prompt enter. If you don't want to write, you can leave it as empty, but I like to write something here. Enter the value, right? So now I want to print the type first of all, and then I will print the value. Now you guys know that whatever the value would be entered by the user, it will be a string, so we have to use typecasting for converting into float. So I'm going to use a float function, because we know that for typecasting, converting any string into integer or float, we have to use their respective function. So we have float function to convert into float data type. So let me run this code, and now I'm going to enter some float value for 234.6. it will be showing me the same data, and but that data is now in float. If I again run this code, if I write here 34, so now it's going to me return 34.0, which is float, and the data type is also floats. I hope you got an idea. But here also some exceptions occur if you will not going to write code carefully. So let's see what exception can happen. Let me comment this one first. Now exceptions may occur. So I am going to write a input function, and inside of this saying that enter some value, right? Now guys, I want to add this, I want to print that value now, but now guys, I'm saying that that is a number, so convert it to integer. I have to use here bracket to close this function. So now I want to run this code. Let's say run this code, and here if I enter any numeric value 234, it will give me 234 correct. But what if a user has entered some character? So you guys know that you have used typecasting, and remember I told you ahead also, in exceptions, if any string has a character, then you can't convert it into integer as well as floats. And same thing happen here. User has entered string characters, but you want to convert it integers. So what it will do? It will definitely return an error. You can see that it tells us that there is a value error. We can't proceed your code. So guys, remember, use function when you know that the value entered by the user is definitely would be an integer or a float, right? So now if again I run that, you will got same value. I hope now you got an idea that how to take input from the user and how to take input as an integer, as a float, as a string. So now I don't think you have any doubt, but still if you have, you can write in the comment sections. Definitely I will reach to you, and I will try to resolve that issue as soon as possible. So guys, if you like this video, don't forget to give a thumbs up and subscribe this channel. So meet you in next video. Thank you.